There was a small glass bottle on the windowsill of the bedroom where I spent my wedding night. It had always been there. I had noticed it before, as a girl, when that room was still just a guest room in my parents' house. Plain glass, no label, filled with something pale and faintly golden. I had assumed it was something practical, something for cleaning or for wood, or for the kind of small household maintenance that fills the shelves of Amish homes without explanation. I did not give it a second thought on my wedding night. I was 17 years old and I had other things to think about. 3 months later, I found out what the bottle was for. And I sat down on the floor where I was standing, and I stayed there for a long time. Because understanding what that bottle meant required me to understand something else, something much larger and much older and much more deliberate than a small glass bottle on a windowsill. It required me to understand that someone had put it there for me, and had said nothing, and had walked away. My name is Rebecca. I grew up Old Order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio, and I left the community 5 years ago. This channel, Beyond the Bonnet, is where I finally say the things that were left on windowsills instead of spoken out loud. Subscribe and hit the like button if you want honest, unfiltered stories from behind the bonnet. 2 seconds. It helps this video reach the people who need it, and I want to make you a promise before we go any further. By the time this video ends, that small glass bottle on a windowsill is going to mean something completely different to you than it does right now. The story of how I found out what it was, and what it told me about the women who raised me, is the most complicated thing I have ever tried to put into words. But I am going to try. Leave me a comment before you go. Has anyone in your life ever tried to help you with something important, silently, without explanation, without making it possible for you to ask, and you didn't understand what they were doing until long after the moment had passed? I will read every single answer. Now let me tell you what I know now that I didn't know then, and then let me take you back to the night I didn't know it. There is a specific kind of help that exists inside communities built on silence. It is not spoken help. It cannot be spoken, because spoken help would require naming the thing being helped with, and naming the thing would break the silence, and the silence, in a community like the one I grew up in, is structural. It is load-bearing. You cannot remove it without something coming down. And so the help exists sideways, oblique, in the form of objects placed without explanation in spaces where they will be found, in gestures made once, quietly, without eye contact, in the specific placement of a thing on a windowsill, in a room where a girl is about to spend her first night as a wife. This is not cruelty. I want to be precise about that from the beginning. What I am describing is, in its way, an act of profound love, the most love the framework allowed. Somebody knew I would need something. Somebody made sure it was there. Somebody chose, within a system that gave her no other option, to do the only thing the system permitted. She just couldn't tell me what it was, or why, or how. I brought this to Dr. Elaine, my therapist, early in our work together, before I had fully unpacked what the bottle meant. And she said something that I did not fully understand until months later, but that I want to give you now, before the story, because it will change how you hear everything that comes after. She said, "In cultures where direct communication about certain subjects is forbidden, care doesn't disappear. It goes underground. It finds the only channels available to it. And those underground channels, the object left without explanation, the gesture made without words, they are simultaneously the most loving thing the system produces and the most damaging, because they deliver care without delivering understanding. And care without understanding leaves the person alone with something they needed to know." Hold that. Care without understanding leaves the person alone with something they needed to know. Now let me take you back to my wedding night. My wedding was on a Thursday in October. The ceremony lasted from before sunrise until nearly noon. The long Amish service, the sermons about yielding and duty and the godly household, the particular weight of 300 people witnessing something they all understood in ways I was about to discover I did not. By the time it was over, I had been awake for 9 hours and sitting on a hard wooden bench for 6 of them, and my body was so tired that the tiredness had passed through feeling and become a kind of blankness. The reception lasted into the evening. I moved through it the way you move through something important when you are slightly beside yourself, present enough to smile, distant enough to be watching yourself smile. The singing was real, the food was real, the warmth of the room was real. I was real, somewhere inside all of it, just slightly out of reach. By 9 o'clock the guests were leaving. By 10 the house was quiet. Samuel, my husband, the name I use for him here, and I were in the small bedroom at the back of the house, the one that had always been the guest room, the one with the single kerosene lamp on the dresser, and the wedding quilt folded on the chair, and the small glass bottle on the windowsill that I had noticed without noticing, the way you notice things that have no meaning to you yet. I did not look at the bottle. I was not thinking about the windowsill. I was thinking about the next hour in the way you think about something you have never done and have no instruction for, with a specific quality of blankness that is the mind's way of protecting itself from the full weight of its own unknowing. I had fragments, the 3 words from the singing, the wedding sermon's language about yielding, the image from the pasture when I was 13, a collection of pieces that did not fit together into anything I could hold. Samuel was as quiet as I was. He sat on the edge of the bed with his hands on his knees, and he looked at the floor, and I recognized the look because I felt it on my own face. The look of someone performing certainty they do not have, for the benefit of someone who is performing the same thing back. "I don't know very much about this," he said, finally. "Not to me exactly, partly to the floor." "Neither do I," said. And that was the most honest conversation we had that night. What followed was not cruel. Samuel was not a cruel man. But it was clumsy and confusing, and I felt things I could not name, and processed them alone in the dark. And when it was over, I lay on my side of the bed and looked at the window and the small glass bottle on the sill, catching the moonlight. And I thought, I wonder what that is. And then I fell asleep. 3 months later, I was at my neighbor Hannah's house for a workday. 6 of us, reorganizing her root cellar before the deep cold came in. Hannah was 20 years older than me. She had been married for 18 years. She was the kind of woman who moved through a room the way water moves through a familiar landscape, without effort, without wasted motion, in exactly the right direction. We were working together in the cellar, just the 2 of us for a few minutes, when she asked, in the particular sideways way that women in our community asked things that could not be asked directly, how I was settling into marriage. I said I was settling well, the required answer. She nodded. She handed me a jar of preserved beets to put on the shelf. Then she said, without looking at me, "Did you find what was left for you?" I stopped. "In the room," she said, "on the windowsill." I turned to look at her. She was still looking at the shelf. "The small bottle," I said. "Yes." "What was it?" She told me. It was olive oil. Left there by my mother, I found out later. Placed on that windowsill in the hour before the wedding guests arrived. Slipped into the room quietly, without telling anyone, without telling me. A practical thing. A thing that would have helped. A thing my mother had almost certainly received no explanation for either. Placed on the windowsill of her own wedding night room by a woman who also could not name what she was offering. Passed forward in silence, generation to generation. An act of care wearing the only clothing the silence allowed it to wear. A small glass bottle. No note, no words. No way for the person who needed it to know it was there, what it was for, or that the woman who left it loved her enough to break the silence halfway. All the way to the windowsill, not one step further. I stood in that root cellar for a long moment. Then I put the jar of beets on the shelf. And I thought about every night of the previous 3 months. I went back to Dr. Elaine with the root cellar story. The olive oil, my mother's silence, the 3 months. I expected her to reflect it back to me, to ask how it made me feel, in the way therapists ask. Instead, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I had not expected. "Tell me about your mother the morning after your wedding." I thought back. She had arrived with the other women, The food, the visiting, the careful normalcy of a community collectively agreeing that everything was fine. She had looked at me. She had touched my arm, once, briefly. "She didn't ask anything," I said. "No," Dr. Elaine said. "She asked the only question she knew how to ask. She put it on the windowsill the night before, and when you didn't reference it the next morning, she understood one of two things. Either you had found it and it had helped, and you were both going to carry that silently forward, or you hadn't found it and she had failed, and she was going to carry that silently forward too." I sat with that. "Either way," she said, "she got no answer. She asked her question in a language you didn't have yet, and she never found out whether it reached you. That is what the silence cost the giver as well as the receiver. Your mother tried to help you. She spent the next 3 months not knowing if she had." That was the thing I had not considered. My mother. Standing at that arm touch the morning after, not performing normalcy, waiting, asking, in the only language she had, whether the bottle had done what she needed it to do. I had not known enough to answer. Here is the thesis. One sentence. A system that forbids direct communication does not eliminate the need for care. It deforms it. The care remains. The love remains. The mother who slips a bottle onto a windowsill and then walks away is doing something real and something painful and something that costs her the answer, costs her the knowing, costs her the conversation she needed to have as much as her daughter did. The silence does not protect the women inside it. It isolates every single one of them. The daughters who don't know what they're looking at, and the mothers who don't know if what they left was ever found. My mother could have sat with me the morning before my wedding and spoken plainly. She could have said, "Here is something that might help. Here is why. Here is what I wish someone had told me." She had the knowledge. She had been married for 20 years. She had the morning. She had me, sitting across from her at a kitchen table, desperately hoping someone would say something real. She left a bottle on a windowsill instead. Not because she didn't love me, because the system that raised her had made a bottle on a windowsill the outermost boundary of what love was allowed to look like. And she went right to that boundary, and she stopped. Because stopping at the boundary was what it meant, in her world, to be faithful. The bottle is still in my possession. I took it when I left, along with the quilt, along with very little else. I did not take it as evidence. I did not take it as an accusation. I took it because it is the most honest object I own. It is small, plain glass, no label. The olive oil dried up long ago. There is nothing left inside it, just the residue of something that was meant to help, and arrived too late and in too much silence to do what it was sent to do. But I keep it, because when I look at it, I see my mother in a room, alone, the morning before my wedding, making a decision, crossing half the distance she needed to cross, and stopping at the last step, not from cruelty, not from indifference, but from a faithfulness so deep and so complete that it had become indistinguishable from the silence itself. She went as far as she could. That was not far enough. And I have made my peace with that, and my peace is real, and some days it holds and some days it doesn't. But she went as far as she could. And I pick up the bottle sometimes, and I hold that. The night I became an Amish wife, there was a secret on my windowsill. I didn't know it was a secret. I didn't know it was care. I didn't know it was the furthest my mother was able to travel, toward the conversation I needed her to have with me. I just knew there was a bottle, plain glass, catching moonlight, and I didn't know what it was for. The secret wasn't that the bottle existed. The secret was what it meant that no one could tell me. That the love was real enough to leave something, and the silence was powerful enough to make sure I would never understand it without 3 months of stumbling and a woman in a root cellar handing me a jar of beets and asking, sideways, in the only language available, "Did you find what was left for you?" If you were watching this and you had a bottle on your windowsill, not necessarily a literal one, but something left for you without explanation by someone who loved you but could not speak, I want you to hear this. The love was real. The silence was the system, not the person. And the person who went halfway, who got to the windowsill and stopped, was doing the most faithful thing their world had taught them to do. They were trying to reach you, inside a framework that made reaching almost impossible. And they tried anyway. And it wasn't enough, and it was also the most they had. Both things are true. I have spent 5 years learning to hold both things at once. Leave me a comment. Tell me, has someone ever tried to help you in a way that couldn't quite reach you? In a language you didn't have yet? In a gesture that arrived without explanation? Tell me yes, or tell me the whole story. The windowsill has been empty for a long time. There is room now for real words. Subscribe to Beyond the Bonnet if you want more stories like this one. Every script I write, everything I say out loud on this channel, it is the conversation the bottle was trying to start. We are just getting to the part where it gets to speak. Until next time, the love was real. Choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.